Welcome to today's episode titled Founder, Funder, Fanatic, the Marc Andreessen story. It's a story I've wanted to cover for a long time now. When he was just 24 years old, Andreessen launched Netscape, the browser and company that kicked off what became the dot-com boom. He became a multimillionaire. He took on Bill Gates and Microsoft, and he lost. And then he started a new company right as the bubble burst and pivoted and persevered until he sold it and made another fortune. And then he started A16Z, one of the most, powerful venture capital firms in the world. And along the way, he's had numerous controversies, while also setting himself up as this very powerful, kind of evangelical, but if you ask me, totally fanatical techno-optimist. This is the story of Marc Andreessen, and it is a cracker. Enjoy it. And just a quick reminder, while these shorter weekly episodes released every Wednesday are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month, you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Some of these hour-long episodes are still free in our back catalogue, so you can get a taste of what to expect. Now, as well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long episodes, behind the paywall are additional bonus episodes. And over the coming months, we'll be adding more bonus episodes for subscribers regularly. Some of these are two-parters, some are three-parters, and some are standalone episodes. Also, as a subscriber, you can listen to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to me telling you about our great subscription offer. And it is a great offer for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. So Andreessen was born in 1971 and he grew up in New Lisbon, Wisconsin, a rural town. Now, he was smart but introverted and obsessed with computers. He has a brother, but a very curious thing about Andreessen, according to those who know him well, is that he never talks about his family. And I read this excellent article by Tad Friend in The New Yorker from 2015. And in it, Andreessen said about his family, "They didn't like me, and I didn't like them all that much either." Now, in 1989, he left for the University of Illinois, majoring in computer science and working part-time at a place called the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, or NCSA. And it was there in late 1992 that he came across the World Wide Web. Now, at that point, you got to remember, it was a text-only system. It was very, very inaccessible. So he decided to change that. He began working on a graphical browser that would make the web usable, like easy to access for regular people. And he pitched the idea to Eric Bina, an older, soft-spoken programmer at NCSA. And in January 1993, they released Mosaic, this browser. And by the end of that year, it had tens of thousands of users and growth was doubling every few weeks. So huge success. But inside NCSA, credit for the browser, it started becoming an issue. And in December 1993, the New York Times ran a story on Mosaic. Andreessen and Bina gave interviews, but when the article came out, it featured NCSA directors. There was no mention of Andreessen and Bina. So it's a bit of bad blood going on there. In December 1993, Andreessen graduated and he left. He was 22, he moved to Palo Alto and he took a job at a tiny startup. And then came an email from Jim Clark. He was the founder of Silicon Graphics, this massively successful 3D graphics company. And Clark had recently quit the company, sold his shares for tens of millions, and now he was looking for his next venture. And someone had shown him Mosaic, and he saw the future, and he contacted Andreessen, and they started talking regularly, discussing potential internet opportunities, online gaming, interactive TV. But nothing really clicked until Andreessen proposed that they reassemble the Mosaic team, build a new browser and go commercial. Clark agreed to fund it with an initial $5 million investment. And so they flew down to Illinois, summoned the key NCSA programmers for this hush-hush meeting. And Clark, who's charismatic and very persuasive, he made his pitch. Stock options, six-figure salaries, and a fresh start in California. Of course, most of them, they jumped at the opportunity, and the next morning, the group resigned en masse and they formed a new company Mosaic Communications Corporation. I mean, like, obviously the name itself sparked immediate tension with NCSA. And while Andreessen was adamant that this new company would be writing brand new code for their browser, NCSA sued. Eventually they settled. Andreessen and Clark renamed their company Netscape and paid NCSA $3 million. Now, inside Netscape's offices, while they were developing their browsers, things were moving really fast. The team worked these brutal hours, but apparently the energy was electric. And I remember reading about this atmosphere and the amount of work that was done prior to launching Netscape Navigator, their first browser. Like, Andreessen and his team, they more or less set the template for all tech companies that follow them. This idea of coding all night and sleeping under your desk. Andreessen also, he wore the dual role of lead technologist and company co-founder. Like, by day, he met with partners, acted as the technical face, and by night, he joined his team coding. Now, it should be noted, however, that he wasn't the CEO. By this stage, they had raised venture capital, and their investors put Jim Barksdale, this tech veteran, in charge, because this is the way it was done back then. VCs were not going to put their money into the hands of an inexperienced 23-year-old. They wanted a grown-up running the show. In October 1994, the browser was released, and it was an instant hit. It was sleek, it was fast, it was reliable, and it quickly became the browser of choice. In terms of the business model, there was a free version that lasted for 90 days, and then you had to pay $39. Now, this business model changed many times over the years. But while all this was going on, Bill Gates had made an about turn in relation to his views on how relevant and important the internet was going to be. Because at a conference in 1994, Gates is quoted as saying, "I see little commercial potential for the internet for the next 10 years. However, within a year he changed his mind. And after one of his now famous think retreats, I love the sound of these, I'd love to do one of these, where he goes to a small cabin by himself to read and reflect, Gates produced the now famous Internet Tidal Wave memo, where he wrote that the internet is, and I quote, crucial to every part of our business." So, in June 1995, a team of Microsoft executives walked into Netscape's Mountain View office and proposed a deal that sounded more like a threat as well as an illegal proposal to form a cartel allowing them to carve up the browser market. I mean, in essence, Microsoft offered Netscape this special relationship. Microsoft would invest in Netscape, taking a 15 to 20% stake, and in return, Microsoft wanted Netscape to agree not to offer its browser for use on Windows. And you have to remember, like, back then, nearly 90% of computers ran on Windows. And in return, Microsoft would agree not to compete with Netscape on the remaining tiny 10% on browsers like developed by other niche operating systems like Apple. In the words of Jim Barksdale, the CEO of Netscape, it was, and I quote, such an explicit proposal to divide markets, close quotes, that he had never encountered in his years of business. And he added, and quote, I have never been in a meeting in which a competitor so blatantly implied we should either stop competing or the competitor would kill us, close quotes. Andreessen himself, I like this, compared it to a visit by Don Corleone. Now, Microsoft denied the threats or the cartel implications, and they called it a friendly brainstorm. But Netscape knew what was coming, and they knew they'd need deep pockets to take on Microsoft, so their cause was definitely helped by their decision to go public just 2 months later, on August 9th, 1995. Netscape was only 16 months old at this time. They'd no profits. Like, it was unheard of for such a young company and an unprofitable company to float. But, crucially, they had just the right product at just the right time, and Wall Street ate it up. It went public at $28 a share. Within hours, the stock hits $75. The company is suddenly worth nearly $3 billion. Andreessen's stake was worth $59 million, and Clark's $5 million investment was now worth over $600 million. And crucially, this IPO, it marks the start of the internet boom. This was ground zero for the start of the internet. And Andreessen instantly became the internet's golden boy. Time magazine put him on the cover, sitting on a throne, barefoot, and in interviews he talked big. He said Netscape would reduce Microsoft Windows to a poorly debugged set of device drivers. And of course, Microsoft took this very, very personally. Netscape had picked a fight with the biggest bully on the block. Now, by this stage, Netscape had over 80% of the browser market, distributing over 40 million copies. You see, back then, you couldn't download a browser. It came in CD format. Microsoft moved fast. They launched Internet Explorer. It was primitive. It wasn't nearly as good as Netscape, but it was bundled free with Windows. So it was easily available to almost 90% of people who owned a computer. That was the difference. By 1996, Internet Explorer 3.0 came out. It was better, not great, but it was good enough. Microsoft then cut a deal with AOL. AOL wanted its icon on Windows Desktop. Microsoft said yes, if AOL used Internet Explorer. AOL agreed, and Netscape lost a major partner. Microsoft then went after PC makers. When Compaq tried to bundle Netscape, Microsoft threatened their Windows license. Compaq, of course, backed down because no Windows, no business, and other manufacturers got the message and followed suit. As Jim Barksdale, the Netscape CEO, put it, Microsoft set out to cut off Netscape's air supply. And by the end of 1996, it was working. Navigator still led in market share, but Microsoft was closing fast. And Netscape, they tried everything, changing their business model, even making Navigator free and releasing the source code. But the end result was inevitable. Microsoft just kept on improving Internet Explorer, and Netscape couldn't compete. And within a few years, over 80% of people were using Internet Explorer. Now, Microsoft were brought to task for their heavy-handed and anti-competitive tactics. In 1998, the US Justice Department took Microsoft to court on antitrust charges, and it was a case that dragged on for many years, and it is a fantastic story that I will cover someday, and it almost led to Microsoft being broken up. And for anyone interested in that story, I really, really recommend that you go to YouTube and put in the following search term: David Boies, that's Boies, and Bill Gates, and you'll get loads of different videos of the painful but really revealing video deposition where Gates is trying to be so clever but just ends up making himself and Microsoft look really bad. It's brilliant stuff. Anyway, for Andreessen and Netscape, the end came in November 1998. AOL bought Netscape for $4.2 billion, which in fairness was a pretty fantastic deal for Netscape given its precarious situation. Andreessen did work with AOL for a few months, but he didn't like it, so he left. So now he's 28, he's wealthy, he's restless, and he gets together with a few former Netscape colleagues, including Ben Horowitz, who was a manager in Netscape, and they launched LoudCloud. It would handle all the messy back-end stuff for websites like servers, hosting, infrastructure, basically early cloud services. So it was way ahead of its time. Now, this was at the peak of the internet boom, so they raised money fast. They landed some key clients like Ford and Nike. But by spring of 2000, the internet bubble burst. LoudCloud still goes public at the time when the market is crashing, and it goes through two really, really tough years. It's struggling, and so they decide to pivot. They sell off the entire hosting side of the business, and instead they focus on the internal software they built to run those servers, and they renamed the company Opsware. Andreessen handed the CEO title to Horowitz, and he stayed on as chairman. And despite Wall Street writing them off, they kept going, and slowly Opsware, it clawed its way back, and in 2007 HP bought it for $1.6 billion, and Andreessen pocketed around $138 million. So, by this stage, Andreessen has been through so many battles. He's had lots of successes, and he's come out the other side with, you'd have to presume, a huge amount of experience and lessons learned. And just a quick reminder, while these shorter weekly episodes released every Wednesday are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month, you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Some of these hour-long episodes are still free in our back catalogue, so you can get a taste of what to expect. Now, as well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long episodes, behind the paywall are additional bonus episodes. And over the coming months, we'll be adding more bonus episodes for subscribers regularly. Some of these are 2-parters, some are 3-parters, and some are standalone episodes. Also, as a subscriber, you can listen to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to me telling you about our great subscription offer. And it is a great offer for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. So this puts him in a very, very good position to do what he did next. In 2009, together with Ben Horowitz, they launched a venture capital firm, Andreessen Horowitz, or A16Z as it's more commonly known as. Why it's called that? The A represents the first letter of Andreessen, the Z the last letter of Horowitz, and 16 represents the number of letters between A and Z in the full name. So this is a nod to their software engineering background, because it's similar to how, say, internationalization is written as I18N, or localization is abbreviated to L10N in the tech world. So they raised $300 million for their first fund. Andreessen told writers at the time that their fund would back startups from seed stage to 50 million late stage bets. They would be long-term holders. Like, what they want to do was find visionary founders and stick with them. Central to this model was loyalty, conviction, and a willingness to take heat for those founders, because that loyalty had already shaped Andreessen's relationship with Mark Zuckerberg. In 2006, Yahoo offered Facebook $1 billion. And I remember reading about that offer, and I thought Zuckerberg was crazy not to take it. So it shows how much I know. Andreessen knew better. He told Zuckerberg not to sell. And years later, Zuckerberg would say that Andreessen was one of the few people who really understood what he was trying to build. And even before launching A16Z, Andreessen had been building up a portfolio as an angel investor. He invested early in Twitter and LinkedIn. So with this new fund, this larger fund, he could go bigger. In 2009, A16Z put $50 million into Skype. 2 years later, Microsoft bought Skype and they made over $200 million profit. Some of their smaller bets were also significant. They put $250,000 into a very early Instagram, and they made $78 million on that investment when Facebook bought it. They bought early stakes in Groupon, Zynga, Airbnb, Stripe. They put more money into Facebook. And what set A16Z apart from other VC firms in those early days was the way it handled founders. I talked about the loyalty, but they also flipped the traditional venture capital model and they reworked it. They drew inspiration from Andreessen's friend Michael Ovitz, the founder of Creative Artist Agencies, because they built a full service firm, at the time employing 45 staff whose sole focus was to support startups with talent acquisition, with marketing and business development. Also, general partners at the firm took relatively modest salaries, which meant their personal wealth was more closely tied to the success of the companies they backed. And I really like the A16Z model. I'm a big fan of it. Now, as you'd expect, and as is normal with most VCs, Andreessen joined the boards of top-tier companies like Facebook and eBay. And in 2014, his position on eBay got him into a very public tussle with the legendary activist investor Carl Icahn. Now, we've come across Icahn in other episodes, most notably, I suppose, our episode on Bill Ackman and Herbalife. And he is not someone you want to get into a fight with. So Icahn had taken a stake in eBay. eBay had bought PayPal way back in 2002. Icahn wanted eBay to spin off PayPal. eBay's board said no. Now, as with a lot of Icahn's battles, it became bitter and public, and he zeroed in on Andreessen. He accused Andreessen of having brazen conflicts of interest, especially around the 2009 Skype sale. You see, eBay had owned Skype, then sold it off to a group of investors that included Andreessen's VC firm, who subsequently went on to sell Skype 2 years later, and Andreessen's firm netted $200 million in profit. So Icahn accused Andreessen of a huge conflict. Now, Andreessen pushed back. He said he'd recused himself, that he'd followed all the rules, and eBay backed him on this. But Icahn kept swinging. He called Andreessen greedy, conflicted, accused him of violating his duty to shareholders, and Andreessen just snapped on CNBC. He compared Icahn to an evil Captain Kirk. Oh man, I bet Icahn felt that nerd burn. Icahn fired back with a much better one. He said, Andreessen has screwed more people than Casanova. I mean, the whole thing became theatre, but eBay eventually agreed to spin off PayPal, which Andreessen had opposed, and in October 2014, Andreessen stepped down from the board of eBay. So that's another scalp that Icahn took. Andreessen then got involved in another far more serious boardroom controversy while he was on the Facebook board. This happened in 2016. So Zuckerberg was proposing a plan to create a new class of Facebook shares. It would allow him to sell shares for philanthropy without losing control. And a special board committee was formed to assess the plan. And crucially, of course, this committee was meant to represent regular shareholders. Andreessen was on it. The committee endorsed the proposal. Shareholders sued, and court filings showed Andreessen had been texting Zuckerberg during the very meetings where the board was supposed to act independently. One message read, quote, "This line of argument is not helping." Another, and these were messages that he was sending to Zuckerberg, said, "Our feedback is entirely intended to protect you and the company." He was sending Zuckerberg live feedback, helping him shape the pitch. The committee, as I said, was meant to support or represent investors. Instead, Andreessen, its most powerful member, was coaching the CEO behind the scenes. I mean, Facebook eventually dropped the plan, but Andreessen's image took a hit, and rightly so. He wasn't neutral. And look, I partly get where Andreessen is coming from here, in that he is 100% the champion of the founder. That's just who he is. Fine. But then, don't put yourself forward and become part of what is meant to be an independent group to represent regular shareholders. You can't do that honestly if you then intend to deliberately undermine that group. That's just sneaky and dishonest. Now, that same year, another controversy. Facebook had launched Free Basics in India, a service offering free access to limited internet. Indian regulators shut it down, citing net neutrality. Andreessen went on Twitter and he wrote, quote, "Anti-colonialism has been economically catastrophic for the Indian people for decades. Why stop now?" Close quote. I mean, the backlash was instant. It sounded like he was defending colonialism. Even Zuckerberg had to step in, and he said, "I found the comments deeply upsetting." Andreessen deleted the tweet, he apologised, but the damage to Facebook's image in India was real. Now, Andreessen stayed on Facebook's board until 2018. He stepped down quietly as the company was dealing with the Cambridge Analytica scandal and mounting global scrutiny. Now, some saw him stepping down as routine, but others saw it as Facebook easing out one of its more volatile voices. But despite these controversies, throughout this time, A16Z continued to grow. Andreessen had been bullish on Bitcoin. As early as 2014, he wrote a New York Times piece calling Bitcoin a game changer. And in 2018, they launched their first dedicated crypto fund. By 2021, they had raised a $2.2 billion crypto fund. This was the biggest of its kind at the time. They were an early investor in Coinbase. Their $20 million investment in the company was worth $11 billion when Coinbase went public. And in fairness to A16Z, they made some really good investments in so many startups. By 2024, it's estimated that A16Z has over 45 billion under management, and just a few months ago, they raised a 20 billion AI fund. And depending on where you get your research, this puts A16Z third in terms of the largest VC firms in the world, behind Tiger Global in number 1 and Sequoia in number 2. And also in terms of success rate, like while this is really hard to measure, based on various sources, A16Z is nearly always placed within the top 5 in terms of performance. So like all credit to Andreessen and Horowitz, they have grown A16Z into a powerhouse. Now, like all VCs, not every investment hits pay dirt. Like it's a numbers game. By Andreessen's measure, 15 deals account for 96% of the returns for venture capital in any given year. And they have had some bizarre investments. I still can't fathom why they'd invest $350 million into Flow, founded by Adam Neumann, the guy behind WeWork, who I believe is probably the world's greatest bullshit artist. But I firmly agree with Andreessen in terms of how they backed the founders 100%. Like, all too often I saw back in the dot-com boom era, and even a few years after that, that VCs would invest in a great startup, and then they'd parachute some seasoned executive into the CEO role, and they just basically cut the legs from under the founders, like the very people who have the energy and the vision. It was just so stupid. Now, that all changed with companies like Facebook and VCs like Peter Thiel's founder fund, where the younger founder was backed. And I think that's the right strategy. I mean, sure, give them experienced executives like Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook, but leave the founder in the driver's seat. It won't always work out, nothing's perfect, but it gives the company the very best chance of succeeding. So kudos to Andreessen for building A16Z and for funding so many great startups. But you can't talk about Andreessen without mentioning his writings, because through his various essays and manifestos over the last few years, he has become this lightning rod, this tech evangelist. And look, this is a business podcast, so I'm not going to get into the politics of it. Just to point out that, like many billionaires in Silicon Valley, Andreessen was a Democrat and has since moved over to becoming a Trump supporter. And my listeners will know I'm not a Trump fan. But over half of the voters of America have voted for him in the last election. They support Trump for various reasons, and I'm not going to harangue someone for being a Trump supporter. Okay, so let's take the politics out of it. But I still have a big problem with Andreessen's writings. So let's just look at the most high-profile piece from 2023 when he published the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. First off, there's a good bit in it that I 100% agree with, because I love technology. I mean, in many ways, I am a techno-optimist. But I have such a huge problem with his stark opinion of people who raise valid questions about technology. He labels people who questions technology as enemies of progress, as Luddites. Like, he leaves no space, and I mean this, zero space to engage with real concerns, like the harm done by social media, like the very valid concerns over AI that are raised by people who are far, far more learned in AI than Andreessen. And for someone to say that anyone who questions my beliefs, who asks difficult questions, who proposes regulation, that these people are enemies, their views shouldn't even be considered, I mean, you're getting into fanatical, extremist territory here. And just to note, like, I mean, if you think I'm being extreme here, the definition of a fanatic is a person filled with excessive and single-minded zeal. Andreessen ticks that box 100%. In the manifesto, he rails against victim mentality, and yet he goes on to present techno-optimists like him as victims. And I quote, "Our present society has been subjected to a mass demoralization campaign for 6 decades against technology." I mean, really? well, that campaign against technology doesn't seem to have been very successful. 5.3 billion people, or 64% of the world, are on social media. 7.2 billion, or 90% of the population, use smartphones. Nvidia didn't exist 6 decades ago, and it's seen its market cap go from 18 billion 10 years ago to over 4 trillion at the time of recording. The top 6 companies in the world, and not 6 of the top companies, but the top 6 companies in the world, all with market caps well over 1 trillion, are all tech companies. Where the hell is Andreessen coming from in both his victimhood and his analysis? Okay, so tech gets criticized. What the hell do you expect? I mean, Andreessen, grow a pair. Like, his writing, his theses are so full of holes. You don't need to be a Sam Harris to be able to analyze and pick them apart. So, I think you know where I stand with Andreessen. I admire his grit, his tenacity, his skills, his vision. Remember, he brought us the very first commercial web browser. I love the fact that he supports founders and that he's funded so many great companies. But his essays, manifestos, whatever you want to call them, they paint a picture of a very thin-skinned fanatic. And yet somehow he's been taken seriously. That's scary. You put it all together and it's pretty clear why the life of Marc Andreessen up to now is such a great business story. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And remember, if you have any comments, any corrections, or any story that you'd like us to cover, email us at info@gbspod.com. All the best, folks.